The alien spacecraft smashed into Earth's surface with a thunderous roar, scattering debris across the dense Pacific Northwest forest. Donald Burns, a 35-year-old former Special Forces soldier turned wilderness survival expert, witnessed the fiery descent from his remote campsite. His military instincts kicked in as he sprinted towards the crash site, unaware that this moment would change the course of human history. Smoke billowed from the twisted metal wreckage as Donald approached. His trained eyes scanned the scene, searching for signs of life. That's when he heard it, a faint groan coming from beneath a large piece of debris. Cautiously, he moved closer, his heart pounding in his chest. What he found both shocked and amazed him. Trapped under the wreckage was a being unlike anything he'd ever seen. It was clearly not human, with iridescent scales covering its body and large, almond-shaped eyes. This was an alien, a female, he guessed, and she was critically injured. As Donald reached out to help, the alien's eyes snapped open. She recoiled, her face contorting in a mixture of pain and disgust. "Stay back, worthless monkey!" she hissed in perfect English, her voice filled with disdain. Donald froze, taken aback by her hostility, but his training kicked in once more. Regardless of her attitude, she needed help, and he was the only one around to provide it. He pushed aside her insults and got to work, carefully removing the debris pinning her down. As he extracted her from the wreckage, Donald's mind raced. An alien presence on Earth could lead to global panic or worse, interspecies conflict. He made a split-second decision. He would keep her existence a secret, at least until he could assess the situation further. Using his extensive first aid knowledge, Donald tended to the alien's wounds. She drifted in and out of consciousness, muttering in a language he couldn't understand. He caught himself wondering about her origins, her species, and what brought her to Earth. Little did Donald know, but the alien he was treating was no ordinary visitor. Her name was Zephyr, a high-ranking scientist among the Voth, an advanced spacefaring civilization. The information she carried could shift the balance of power in the galaxy. As Donald worked, unbeknownst to him, events were already in motion far beyond Earth's atmosphere. The Voth had detected the loss of their ship and were dispatching a recovery team. The clock was ticking, and Earth was about to become the center stage of an interstellar crisis. Zephyr's eyes fluttered open once more, this time lingering on Donald as he dressed her wounds. A flicker of confusion passed over her face, quickly replaced by her mask of superiority. Yet something had changed. The compassion and skill displayed by this human, this worthless monkey, didn't align with her preconceptions. As night fell, Donald made a difficult decision. He couldn't leave Zephyr at the crash site. With great care, he prepared to transport her to his remote cabin. As he lifted her, Zephyr's eyes met his, a silent exchange passing between them. In that moment, neither of them could have predicted how this encounter would reshape humanity's future among the stars. Donald Burns, the lone human witness to an extraordinary event, took his first steps into a larger universe. With an injured alien in his arms and unknown forces converging on Earth, he was about to be thrust into the heart of an impending interstellar crisis. His simple act of kindness was the spark that would ignite humanity's journey beyond their home planet. Donald's muscles strained as he carried Zephyr through the dense forest, her alien form cradled in his arms. The night air was crisp, filled with the scent of pine and damp earth. He moved carefully, each step calculated to avoid jostling his injured passenger. "We're almost there," he whispered, more to himself than to Zephyr. As they emerged from the tree line, Donald's cabin came into view. It was a sturdy structure of rough-hewn logs, nestled against a backdrop of towering evergreens. He fumbled with the door latch, shouldering it open before gently laying Zephyr on his bed. In the soft glow of the kerosene lamp, Donald assessed her injuries. The iridescent scales covering her body were cracked and discolored in places, oozing a strange, luminescent fluid. Her breathing was labored, each inhale accompanied by a faint whistle. Drawing on his military medical training, Donald set to work. He cleaned her wounds with antiseptic, applied salves, and fashioned makeshift bandages from strips of clean cloth. Throughout the night, he monitored her condition, changing dressings and administering painkillers from his first aid kit. As dawn broke, Zephyr's eyes fluttered open. She tried to sit up, hissing in pain. "Easy," Donald said, gently pressing her back down. "You're safe, but you need to rest." Zephyr's large, almond-shaped eyes fixed on him, a mixture of confusion and disdain in her gaze. Why are you helping me, human?" Donald shrugged. "It's what we do. Help those in need." Over the next few days, a routine developed. Donald tended to Zephyr's wounds, prepared simple meals, and kept watch for any signs of search parties. Zephyr, for her part, remained aloof but gradually became more talkative. On the third day, as Donald changed her bandages, Zephyr spoke up. "I need to contact my people, my communication device." Donald nodded. "I retrieved what I could from the crash site. It's pretty banged up, though." He brought over a box containing twisted pieces of metal and circuitry. Zephyr sifted through it, her face falling. "The primary resonance matrix is completely destroyed," she muttered. "Without it, I can't establish a quantum link." Donald watched as she attempted to piece together the alien technology, fascinated by the complexity of the device. "Is there anything I can do to help?" Zephyr paused, considering him for a moment. "Perhaps. Your planet may have suitable materials for a rudimentary replacement. I'll need your assistance in acquiring them." As Zephyr's condition improved, she began to share more about her species, the Voth, and their advanced technology. Donald listened intently, his heart pounding at the implications of her presence on Earth. One evening, as they sat by the fireplace, Zephyr observed Donald whittling a piece of wood. "You show remarkable dexterity for a primate," she commented, her tone less harsh than before. Donald chuckled. "Thanks, I think. It's just something I picked up to pass the time out here." Zephyr leaned closer, examining his work. "Your ability to manipulate materials with such primitive tools is impressive." Their conversation was interrupted by a crackle from Donald's old military radio. He quickly turned down the volume and listened intently. Tweet. Unidentified craft. Search teams deployed. Top priority." Donald's face grew grim. He turned to Zephyr. "They know about the crash. It won't be long before they start searching this area." Zephyr's scales rippled, a sign Donald had come to recognize as agitation. "We can't let them find me. My research, it could shift the balance of power in the galaxy if it falls into the wrong hands." Donald nodded, his mind already formulating a plan. "We need to fortify this place, buy ourselves some time while we figure out our next move." Over the next few days, Donald and Zephyr worked together to secure the cabin. They set up tripwires in the surrounding forest, rigged early warning systems using a combination of human ingenuity and salvage Voth technology, and prepared escape routes. As they worked side by side, Donald noticed a change in Zephyr's demeanor. She began to ask questions about Earth, showing genuine curiosity about human culture and technology. In turn, Donald found himself captivated by her descriptions of distant worlds and advanced civilizations. One night, as they sat reviewing their defenses, Zephyr turned to Donald. "I misjudged your species, Donald Burns. Your resourcefulness, your adaptability. These are qualities I hadn't expected to find." Donald smiled, meeting her alien gaze. "We're full of surprises." Their moment of understanding was shattered by a series of rapid beeps from one of their perimeter alarms. Donald quickly doused the lights and moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. In the distance, he could see the faint glow of flashlights moving through the trees. "They're here," he whispered. Zephyr joined him at the window, her scales shifting to blend with the shadows. "Not just your people," she said, her voice tense. "I can sense Voth energy signatures. My people have arrived as well." Donald's mind raced. They were trapped between two forces, both potentially hostile. He turned to Zephyr, his decision made. "We can't stay here. We need to leave. Now." As they hurriedly gathered supplies, Donald explained his plan. "I have an old military contact, someone who might be able to help us. It's a long shot, but it's our best chance at keeping you safe and hidden." Zephyr nodded, her eyes meeting Donald's. "I trust you, Donald Burns. My survival depends on your knowledge of this world." As they prepared to slip out into the night, Zephyr placed a scaled hand on Donald's arm. There's something you need to know. My research, it's not just about advancing Voth technology. There's a conflict brewing in the galaxy, one that could have dire consequences for both our species. Donald absorbed this information, understanding the weight of their situation. With a nod, he shouldered his pack and checked his weapon. We'll figure it out together. Right now, we need to focus on getting out of here alive. With one last look at the cabin that had been their sanctuary, Donald and Zephyr slipped into the forest. The sounds of approaching search parties echoed behind them as they disappeared into the shadows, two unlikely allies embarking on a journey that would shape the fate of two worlds. Worlds! The forest enveloped them, a living, breathing entity that both concealed and hindered their progress. Donald moved with practiced ease, his footsteps nearly silent on the carpet of pine needles. Zephyr followed, her movements still hampered by her injuries. "Watch your step," Donald whispered, pointing to a gnarled root jutting from the earth. "The terrain gets tricky here." Zephyr nodded, her large eyes glinting in the moonlight. She stumbled slightly, a hiss of pain escaping her lips. Donald was at her side in an instant, steadying her with a firm grip. "I'm fine," she insisted, but her labored breathing betrayed her exhaustion. Donald frowned, scanning the area. "We need to rest. There's a sheltered spot up ahead." They made their way to a small clearing, protected on three sides by a rocky outcropping. Donald helped Zephyr sit, then quickly set about erasing their tracks. As he worked, Donald pulled out a small device from his pack. It looked like an old military radio, but with significant modifications. He input a series of complex codes, then spoke in a low voice. "Nighthawk to Eagle's Nest. Come in, Eagle's Nest." Static crackled, then a gruff voice responded. "Eagle's Nest here. This better be good, Nighthawk." "Jake, it's Donald. I need your help. Code Omega 7. There was a pause then. "Verified. What's your situation?" Donald glanced at Zephyr, who was watching him intently. "I can't explain over comms. Can you meet?" "Affirmative. Rendezvous point. Charlie, 48 hours. Be careful, Burns. There's a lot of activity out there." The communication ended. Donald turned to Zephyr, explaining, "That was Major Jake Harrison, an old friend. He'll help us, but we need to reach the meeting point." Zephyr nodded, her scales shimmering in the dim light. "Your military connections may prove useful, but can he be trusted with my existence?" Before Donald could respond, a twig snapped nearby. He immediately dropped low, signaling Zephyr to stay still. Voices drifted through the trees, accompanied by the crunch of boots on forest debris. "I swear I saw something move over here," a male voice said. "Probably just a deer," another replied. "Come on, we need to get back to camp." Donald held his breath as the voices faded. Once he was sure they were gone, he turned to Zephyr. "Campers, we need to move." They set off again, Donald leading them through the darkest parts of the forest. As dawn broke, they came across a small stream. Donald paused, kneeling to refill their water bottles. "We should rest here for a bit," he said. "I need to check your wounds." Zephyr lowered herself to the ground, allowing Donald to examine her injuries. As he worked, she spoke softly. "Your knowledge of this terrain is impressive. I underestimated the complexity of your world." Donald smiled as he applied a fresh bandage. "Earth has its challenges, but it's home." Their moment of respite was short-lived. A low hum filled the air, growing louder by the second. Donald's eyes widened as he recognized the sound. "Drones," he hissed. "We need to move, now!" They scrambled to their feet, abandoning stealth for speed. The forest blurred around them as they ran, the buzz of drones growing ever closer. Suddenly, they burst into a clearing. Donald skidded to a stop, his heart racing. Before them stood a group of startled hikers, their mouths agape at the sight of Zephyr. Time seemed to freeze. Then Donald sprang into action. He grabbed a canister from his pack, pulled the pin, and tossed it into the air. Thick, acrid smoke billowed out, enveloping the clearing. "Run!" he shouted to Zephyr, grabbing her arm and pulling her into the trees. They didn't stop running until the sounds of confused shouts and coughing faded behind them. Finally, they collapsed against a fallen log, chests heaving. Zephyr turned to Donald, her eyes wide. You risked exposure to protect me. Donald nodded, still catching his breath. We're in this together now. As they rested, Donald's mind raced. The encounter with the hikers had been too close. They needed to be more careful. Miles away, Commander Czar stood before a holographic display, his scaled fingers dancing over the controls. The screen showed a map of the forest with a pulsing red dot indicating a faint energy signature. We're close, he growled to his team. Increase the search radius. Leave no trace of our presence. Meanwhile, in a mobile command center, General Steele pored over satellite imagery and sensor readings. Deploy the Spectre teams, he ordered. Use the new anti-cloaking tech. If there's an alien out there, I want it found. Back in the forest, Donald and Zephyr continued their journey, unaware of the forces closing in around them. As the sun began to set, a structure loomed before them, hidden among the trees. What is that? Zephyr asked, her voice hushed. Donald squinted, taking in the reinforced walls and security measures. Some kind of research facility. It's not on any maps I know of. They crept closer, staying low in the underbrush. Donald's trained eye picked out weaknesses in the perimeter defenses. This might be our chance to gather supplies and information, he whispered. Zephyr nodded, her expression determined. Lead the way, Donald Burns. With practiced efficiency, they bypassed the outer security measures and slipped inside the facility. Alarms blared in the distance, but Donald guided them through maintenance tunnels and lesser-used corridors. They emerged in a dimly lit laboratory. Zephyr gasped as she took in the array of alien technology scattered across workbenches. This is Voth tech, she said, her voice a mixture of awe and confusion. Donald moved to a computer terminal, his fingers flying over the keyboard. Files flashed across the screen, revealing a history of extraterrestrial encounters that spanned decades. This can't be, Zephyr murmured, reading over his shoulder. My people have been here before, but we've always believed. Their exploration was interrupted by the sound of a door sliding open. They spun around, Donald reaching for his weapon, only to find themselves face to face with a startled woman in a lab coat. Who are you? She demanded, her eyes darting between Donald and Zephyr. What are you doing here? Donald tensed, ready for a fight, but Zephyr stepped forward. We mean you no harm, she said. I am Zephyr of the Voth, and I require your assistance. The woman's eyes widened, a mix of fear and fascination crossing her face. I'm Dr. Elena Rossi, she said slowly, and I think we have a lot to talk about. As they began to exchange information, alarms suddenly blared throughout the facility. Donald rushed to a security monitor, his face paling at what he saw. We've got company, he announced grimly, both human and Voth forces converging on our location. Dr. Rossi's expression hardened. There's an experimental teleportation device in the next lab. It's unstable, but it might be our only chance. They raced to the adjacent room, the sounds of gunfire echoing through the halls. Dr. Rossi frantically input coordinates as Donald and Zephyr barricaded the door. It's now or never, Donald shouted as the door began to buckle under the assault. Just as both human and Voth forces burst into the room, Dr. Rossi slammed her hand down on the activation switch. Energy crackled around them, the air itself seeming to twist and warp. In a blinding flash of light, Donald, Zephyr, and Dr. Rossi vanished, leaving behind a scene of chaos as two worlds collided in their wake. Their destination was unknown, but one thing was certain. The journey that began with a chance encounter in the woods was just the beginning. The world dissolved into a kaleidoscope of light and energy. Donald's stomach lurched as he felt himself being pulled apart and reassembled, molecule by molecule. When the disorientation subsided, he found himself sprawled on a cold concrete floor, the acrid smell of dust and stale air filling his nostrils. Everyone all right? He croaked, pushing himself up to a sitting position. Zephyr groaned nearby, her scales flickering weakly in the darkness. I think so. That was unpleasant. Dr. Rossi, Donald called out, squinting to adjust his eyes to the dim surroundings. Here, came a shaky reply, but I think I'm going to be sick. Donald fumbled for his flashlight, clicking it on. The beam cut through the gloom, revealing a cavernous room filled with rows of outdated computer banks and monitoring equipment. Dust motes danced in the air, stirred by their sudden arrival. "Where are we?" Zephyr asked, her large eyes reflecting the flashlight's beam. Donald swept the light around, taking in their surroundings. Some kind of underground facility, military by the look of it. He moved to a nearby control panel, wiping away years of grime to reveal faded labels. "This is a bunker. Cold War era, if I had to guess." Dr. Rossi stumbled to her feet, steadying herself against a metal cabinet. The teleportation device, it must have locked onto the nearest compatible receiver, but I had no idea a place like this even existed. Donald's military instincts kicked in. "We need to secure our position and assess our resources. Dr. Rossi, see if you can get any of these systems online. Zephyr, let's search for medical supplies and rations." As they set to work, Donald's mind raced. The firefight at the research facility had confirmed his worst fears. Both human and Voth forces were now actively hunting them. Their unexpected teleportation might have bought them some time, but he knew it was only temporary. After an hour of exploration, they reconvened in the main control room. Donald had managed to locate and activate an old emergency generator, providing them with basic power and lighting. Dr. Rossi had made some headway with the bunker's ancient computer systems, while Zephyr had discovered a storage area with preserved rations and medical supplies. "I've got good news and bad news," Dr. Rossi announced, her fingers flying over a keyboard. "The good news is that this bunker was designed to be self-sufficient for extended periods. We have power, air filtration, and enough supplies to last for weeks." "And the bad news?" Donald asked, already anticipating the answer. Dr. Rossi grimaced. "Our communication devices were fried by the teleportation. We're cut off from the outside world, at least for now." Zephyr approached, carrying a box of medical supplies. "Perhaps that isolation is a blessing. It will allow us time to regroup and plan our next move." Donald nodded, helping Zephyr set down the box. "Agreed. But we can't stay here forever. We need to figure out exactly where we are and how to contact my friend Jake. He's still our best shot at navigating this mess." As Dr. Rossi continued to work on the computer systems, Donald helped Zephyr tend to her wounds. The alien's resilience continued to impress him, but he could see the toll their ordeal was taking on her. "How are you holding up?" he asked softly, applying a fresh bandage to her arm. Zephyr's scales shimmered, a sign Donald had come to recognize as a mix of pain and emotion. "I am conflicted. My mission, my people, everything I thought I knew has been called into question." Donald placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, marveling at the complex texture of her scales. "We'll figure this out together, I promise." Their eyes met, and for a moment the chaos of their situation faded away. Donald felt a surge of something he couldn't quite name: protection, admiration, and perhaps something more. The moment was broken by an excited exclamation from Dr. Rossi. "I've got it! I've accessed the bunker's main database. You're not going to believe this." Donald and Zephyr hurried over to the computer terminal, where Dr. Rossi was scrolling through a series of classified documents. "This facility," she explained, her voice filled with awe, "was part of a top-secret program called Project Sentinel. It was designed to monitor and defend against potential extraterrestrial threats." Zephyr leaned in, her eyes widening as she scanned the information. "But this data, it suggests your people have known about the existence of other species for decades." Donald frowned, a sinking feeling in his gut. If that's true, it means the government has been keeping this secret for generations. The question is, why? As they delved deeper into the Project Sentinel files, Dr. Rossi made another startling discovery. Using the bunker's old medical equipment and the genetic data she had managed to bring with her, she began analyzing Zephyr's DNA. Hours passed as they worked, each revelation adding another layer to the complex tapestry of human-Voth relations. Donald alternated between helping Dr. Rossi with her research and fortifying their position, always keeping one eye on the bunker's entrance. As the first day in their underground sanctuary drew to a close, Dr. Rossi called them together, her face pale with the weight of her discovery. "I've compared Zephyr's genetic structure to the Voth data, and there are significant similarities between Voth and human DNA. The implications are staggering. It suggests a possible shared ancestral connection between our species. The room fell silent as the gravity of this revelation sank in. Zephyr's scales flickered rapidly, a sign of her inner turmoil. "How is this possible?" she whispered. "Our histories, our beliefs about our origins." Donald paced the room, his mind racing. "This changes everything. If we can prove this connection, it could be the key to preventing a war between our species." Dr. Rossi nodded, her expression grim. "But it also makes our work here even more dangerous. There are people on both sides who would kill to keep this information secret." As they discussed the implications of their discovery, none of them noticed the small indicator light on one of the bunker's old communication panels. After decades of silence, an automated signal had begun broadcasting their location to a select few who still monitored the old Project Sentinel frequencies. Miles away in a high-tech command center, General Steele received the alert. His eyes narrowed as he studied the incoming data. "I want a team at those coordinates yesterday," he barked to his staff. "Whatever's in that bunker could be the key to this whole alien situation." In orbit above the Earth, Captain Dren of the Voth battlecruiser also detected the faint signal. "Prepare a stealth insertion team," he ordered. "This may be our chance to recover Zephyr and her research." Back in the bunker, unaware of the forces now converging on their location, Donald, Zephyr, and Dr. Rossi continued their work. As Zephyr and Dr. Rossi pored over genetic data, Donald found himself drawn to a dusty map on the wall. His finger traced a path through the Rocky Mountains, calculating distances and potential routes. "We can't stay here much longer," he murmured to himself. "But where do we go from here?" The answer, he knew, lay somewhere beyond the bunker's reinforced walls. But for now, they had a moment of fragile peace, a chance to catch their breath before plunging back into a world where the fates of two species hung in the balance. Donald's finger traced a final line on the dusty map, his decision made. "We need to move," he announced, turning to face Zephyr and Dr. Rossi. "This bunker's been our sanctuary, but it can't be our prison." As if on cue, a low rumble echoed through the facility. Donald's eyes widened, recognizing the sound of approaching vehicles. "Looks like our time's up," he muttered, grabbing his pack. "Let's move." They raced through the bunker, gathering essential supplies and research data. Dr. Rossi downloaded the last of the Project Sentinel files onto a portable drive, while Zephyr carefully packed her makeshift energy weapon. Donald led them to an emergency exit he'd discovered during his earlier explorations. The rusted door groaned in protest as he forced it open, revealing a narrow tunnel sloping upwards. "This should lead us to the surface," he said, ushering them inside. "Watch your step." The ascent was grueling. The air grew thinner and colder as they climbed, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. After what felt like hours, they emerged into a dense forest, the afternoon sun filtering through a canopy of pine needles. Donald scanned their surroundings, his military instincts on high alert. The dense foliage provided cover, but also limited visibility. He motioned for the others to stay low and follow his lead. They had barely covered 100 yards when the unmistakable sound of a snapping twig froze them in place. Donald's hand moved to his weapon, eyes searching for the source of the noise. A figure emerged from behind a large oak, hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Easy there, folks," the man said, his voice calm but authoritative. "I'm Agent Marcus Cole. I'm here to help." Donald's grip on his weapon tightened. Something about Cole's demeanor set off warning bells in his mind. "How did you find us?" he demanded. Cole smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Let's just say I have my sources. Now, why don't we discuss this like civilized people?" Before Donald could respond, movement in his peripheral vision caught his attention. More figures were emerging from the trees, all armed and moving with military precision. "Run!" Donald shouted, grabbing Dr. Rossi's arm and pushing her ahead of him. Zephyr needed no encouragement, her lithe form darting between the trees with surprising agility. Gunfire erupted behind them, bullets splintering bark and sending leaves spiraling to the forest floor. Donald's mind raced, formulating an escape plan on the fly. He led them down a steep embankment, using the terrain to break their pursuers' line of sight. "This way," he called, spotting a narrow ravine cutting through the forest floor. They scrambled down the rocky slope, loose stones clattering beneath their feet. Suddenly, Dr. Rossi cried out in pain. Her foot had caught in a tangle of roots, wrenching her ankle as she fell. Donald doubled back, scooping her up in his arms without breaking stride. "Zephyr, cover us!" he shouted. The Voth scientist nodded, raising her cobbled-together energy weapon. A pulse of blue-white light erupted from its muzzle, striking a tree near their pursuers. The trunk exploded in a shower of splinters, forcing Cole's team to dive for cover. They pressed on, Donald's muscles burning under the strain of carrying Dr. Rossi. The sound of pursuit grew fainter, but he knew they couldn't outrun them forever. As they crested a small hill, Donald nearly collided with another group of people emerging from the trees. His heart sank, thinking Cole's men had outflanked them. "Stop right there," a gruff voice commanded. Donald tensed, ready to fight, when an older man stepped forward. His weathered face was creased with concern rather than hostility. "Please, we mean you no harm," the man said, lowering his hands. "I'm Dr. Samuel Hawthorne. I used to work for Project Sentinel." Donald hesitated, his instincts warring with their desperate need for allies. "How do we know we can trust you?" Dr. Hawthorne's eyes flickered to Zephyr, a mix of awe and scientific curiosity in his gaze. "Because I've spent my life preparing for this moment. The bunker's reactivation signal. I knew it had to be something extraordinary." A distant shout reminded them of the imminent danger. Dr. Hawthorne gestured urgently. "Come with us. We have a safe place nearby." With Cole's team closing in, Donald made a split-second decision. "Lead the way," he said, adjusting his grip on Dr. Rossi. Dr. Hawthorne's group moved with practiced efficiency, guiding them through the forest to a well-hidden cave entrance. Inside, Donald's eyes widened at the sight of advanced technology seamlessly integrated into the natural rock formations. "Welcome to our little outpost," Dr. Hawthorne said, a hint of pride in his voice. "It's not much, but it's off the grid and secure." As they settled in, introductions were made and injuries tended to. Dr. Rossi's ankle was wrapped, while Zephyr marveled at the blend of human and salvaged alien tech surrounding them. "This is incredible," she murmured, running a scaled hand over a console. "Some of this is clearly based on Voth designs." Dr. Hawthorne nodded. "We've been studying and reverse engineering whatever we could get our hands on for years. But nothing compares to having a real, live Voth scientist here." Over the next few hours, they shared information and began formulating plans. Zephyr worked with Dr. Hawthorne to modify their communication systems, incorporating Voth encryption protocols. "I think we've got it," Zephyr announced, her scales shimmering with excitement. "We should be able to contact your friend Jake securely now." Donald nodded, feeling a glimmer of hope for the first time in days. He input the complex series of codes that would route their signal to Jake's secure line. After several tense moments, a familiar voice crackled through the speaker. "Donald, is that really you?" "Jake," Donald breathed, relief washing over him. "We need your help. Things are worse than we thought." As Donald brought Jake up to speed, Dr. Rossi called them over to her workstation. Her face was pale, but her eyes shone with the fire of scientific discovery. "I've finished analyzing the genetic data," she said, pulling up a complex diagram on her screen. "It's confirmed. There's a definite ancestral link between humans and Voth." The revelation sent shockwaves through the group. Zephyr's scales rippled with a kaleidoscope of colors, reflecting her turbulent emotions. "There's more," Zephyr said softly, her voice heavy with the weight of long-held secrets. "My research, it wasn't just about cultural exchange. Our species is dying, Donald. Genetic degradation has been affecting us for generations. I was looking for a cure." She met Donald's gaze, her large eyes filled with a mixture of hope and fear. "And now I think human DNA might hold the key to saving my people." The gravity of the situation settled over them like a heavy blanket. Their mission had grown from preventing a war to potentially saving an entire species. Their planning session was interrupted by a proximity alarm. Dr. Hawthorne rushed to a security monitor, his face grim. "It's Cole," he announced. "They found us." Donald moved to the monitor, assessing their options. The mercenaries were closing in fast, cutting off their escape routes. "We need to split up," he said, his mind racing through scenarios. "I'll lead them away. The rest of you, stick to the plan. Get to the peace talks. Show them the truth." Protests erupted, but Donald silenced them with a raised hand. "It's the only way. Zephyr, you have to finish this. For both our peoples." Their eyes met, a universe of unspoken words passing between them. Zephyr nodded, her scales shimmering with commitment. Donald grabbed his pack and headed for the exit. He paused at the threshold, looking back at the unlikely group of humans and a Voth united in a common cause. "Stay safe," he said simply, then slipped into the gathering darkness. As Donald disappeared into the forest, the sounds of pursuit growing closer, Zephyr turned to the others. The fate of two species now rested on their shoulders, and time was running out. As Donald disappeared into the forest, the sounds of pursuit growing closer, Zephyr turned to the others. The fate of two species now rested on their shoulders, and time was running out. "We need to move," Dr. Hawthorne urged, his fingers flying over a control panel. A hidden door slid open, revealing a narrow passage. "This will take us to our backup transport." They hurried through the tunnel, the cave's alarm still blaring behind them. Dr. Rossi limped along, supported by Zephyr. The Voth scientist's scales shimmered with worry, her thoughts torn between their mission and Donald's safety. "He'll be all right," Dr. Rossi whispered, sensing Zephyr's distress. "Donald's one of the best." Zephyr nodded, forcing herself to focus on the task at hand. They emerged from the tunnel into a small clearing where a camouflage vehicle waited. Dr. Hawthorne wasted no time, ushering them inside and powering up the engines. As they sped away from the hidden base, Zephyr caught glimpses of armed figures through the trees. Her heart raced, hoping Donald had managed to draw them away. Donald crouched behind a fallen log, his breath coming in controlled, silent gasps. He could hear Cole's men crashing through the underbrush, closing in on his position. Years of Special Forces training kicked in as he formulated his next move. He waited until the footsteps were almost upon him, then sprang into action. Donald vaulted over the log, catching the nearest mercenary off guard with a swift strike to the solar plexus. As the man doubled over, Donald relieved him of his weapon and fired a quick burst into the canopy above. Branches and leaves rained down, momentarily disorienting the other pursuers. Donald used the confusion to slip away, setting a punishing pace through the rocky terrain. "Spread out," he heard Cole bark in the distance. "Don't let him get away." Donald allowed himself a grim smile. He had no intention of getting away, not yet. His job was to keep these men busy, to buy Zephyr and the others the time they needed. He zigzagged through a field of boulders, using natural choke points to his advantage. As two mercenaries rounded a corner, they found themselves face to face with a hastily constructed trap. A tripwire sent a cascade of rocks tumbling down, forcing them to dive for cover. Donald didn't wait to see the results. He was already moving, his mind racing ahead to the next obstacle he could use against his pursuers. Miles away, Zephyr and her companions arrived at a secluded airfield. A lone figure waited beside a sleek, dark aircraft, a model Zephyr didn't recognize. "About time you showed up," the man said gruffly as they approached. His weathered face broke into a wry grin. "I'm Major Jake Harrison. Welcome to the last hope for humanity and Voth kind." Dr. Hawthorne made quick introductions as they boarded the aircraft. Zephyr's eyes widened as she took in the advanced technology surrounding them. "This is incredible," she murmured, running a scaled hand over a control panel. "Some of this looks like Voth design, but more streamlined." Harrison nodded. "We've had some help over the years. Think you can work your magic and make us even harder to detect?" Zephyr's frills flared with excitement. "Absolutely!" As the aircraft lifted off, Zephyr immersed herself in the ship's systems. She integrated Voth stealth algorithms, enhancing their already impressive cloaking technology. The familiar work helped calm her nerves, pushing aside worries about Donald and the monumental task ahead. Dr. Rossi's voice pulled her from her focus. "Zephyr, look." Through the view screen, Zephyr saw Earth falling away beneath them, the curvature of the planet becoming visible. A lump formed in her throat. For all their differences, humans and Voth shared this fragile blue world. She steeled herself, more determined than ever to prevent war between their species. As they approached the space station, Harrison's voice grew tense. Heavy security ahead. Zephyr, how's that stealth holding up? We're as invisible as I can make us, she replied, but a direct scan will still detect us. Harrison nodded grimly. Then we'll have to rely on my clearance and a whole lot of luck. The next few minutes were a blur of tense radio exchanges and careful maneuvering. Zephyr held her breath as they approached the docking bay, certain they'd be discovered at any moment. But Harrison's credentials held, and soon they were aboard the station. We need to move fast, Harrison said as they disembarked. Security will figure out something's off soon enough. They made their way through the station's corridors, Zephyr's heart pounding with every step. Twice they had to duck into side passages to avoid patrols. As they neared the main conference room, alarms began to blare. Looks like our luck's run out, Harrison muttered, drawing his sidearm. Get ready for a fight. The doors to the conference room slid open, revealing a scene of chaos. General Steele and a tall, imposing Voth, Ambassador Krell, Zephyr realized, were shouting at each other across a long table. Armed guards from both sides had weapons drawn, the situation balanced on a knife's edge. Zephyr stepped forward, her voice cutting through the din. Stop, please, you must listen. All eyes turned to her, expressions of shock and confusion rippling through the room. Ambassador Krell's frills flared in recognition. Zephyr, you're alive. I am, she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. And I bring knowledge that changes everything. Over the next few minutes, Zephyr laid out the evidence. The genetic link between humans and Voth. Her research on halting Voth degradation. Dr. Rossi provided supporting data, her scientific expertise lending weight to Zephyr's words. As understanding dawned, the tension in the room slowly began to dissipate. General Steele lowered his weapon, his expression thoughtful. This changes things? Ambassador Krell nodded slowly. Indeed it does. Perhaps we have been too hasty in our judgments. The delicate moment of understanding was shattered by a violent tremor that shook the entire station. Alarms blared as a voice came over the intercom. Voth battlecruiser decloaking? They're charging weapons! Zephyr's blood ran cold as she recognized the ship on the main view screen. Captain Dren? She whispered. He's going to destroy the station. As chaos erupted once more in the conference room, Zephyr's mind raced. The fate of both species now hung by a thread, with Captain Dren's finger on the trigger. She looked around at the faces of humans and Voth, united in their fear and confusion. There had to be a way to stop this, to make Dren understand. But as the battlecruiser's weapons powered up, she knew they were out of time. The space station shuddered under the first volley of fire. Zephyr steadied herself against a console, her eyes fixed on the looming shape of Dren's ship. In that moment, she knew that the next few seconds would determine the future of human-Voth relations, and perhaps the survival of both species. Species. The space station rocked violently as another barrage of fire struck its shields. Zephyr stumbled, catching herself on a nearby console. Through the view screen, she watched in horror as Captain Dren's battlecruiser loomed ever closer, its weapons glowing with deadly energy. Suddenly, a familiar voice crackled over the station's comm system. General Steele, this is Donald. Dren's gone rogue. You need to activate Earth's orbital defenses now. Steele's eyes widened in recognition. Without hesitation, he barked orders into his communicator. Within seconds, a swarm of sleek defense satellites emerged from Earth's orbit, their weapons trained on Dren's ship. The tension in the room was palpable as human and Voth forces found themselves unexpectedly united against a common threat. Ambassador Krell's frills quivered with a mix of anger and concern. We must stop this madness before it's too late. Zephyr's mind raced, analyzing the situation with lightning speed. Her eyes darted between the approaching battlecruiser and the advanced technology surrounding her on the station. An idea began to form. I can disable Dren's ship, she announced, her scales shimmering with willpower. All eyes turned to her. With access to your systems, I can create a targeted electromagnetic pulse. It will knock out their weapons and propulsion without harming the crew. Ambassador Krell studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Do it. Zephyr and Dr. Rossi immediately set to work, their fingers flying over control panels as they repurposed the station's systems. The human scientists' expertise in adapting alien technology proved invaluable as they raced against time. Major Harrison coordinated with Earth's defense forces, orchestrating a complex series of maneuvers designed to distract and confuse Dren's crew. The space around the station became a dizzying dance of ships and energy beams. As Zephyr worked, she caught snippets of urgent communications. Donald had somehow made it to a military base and was now piloting an experimental fighter, joining the fray in orbit. Her heart swelled with pride and worry. It's ready, Dr. Rossi announced, holding up a small pulsing device. Zephyr nodded, her scales rippling with nervous energy. Now we just need to get close enough to use it. Harrison appeared at her side, a determined glint in his eye. Leave that to me. Minutes later, Zephyr found herself aboard a small, nimble shuttle, flanked by Harrison and a hand-picked team of human and Voth operatives. They weaved through the chaos of battle, taking advantage of the distraction provided by Earth's forces and Donald's unconventional tactics. As they approached Dren's battlecruiser, Zephyr guided them to a seldom-used maintenance hatch. Her intimate knowledge of Voth ship design allowed them to slip past the outer defenses undetected. Once inside, they encountered fierce resistance. Loyalist crew members, unaware of the true situation, fought to protect their ship. Zephyr winced as energy weapons sizzled past her head, leaving scorch marks on the metallic walls. "This way!" she called, leading the team through a maze of corridors. They fought their way forward, human and Voth working in seamless coordination. Finally, they reached the central control room. The doors hissed open, revealing a scene of frantic activity. Captain Dren stood at the center, his scales dark with rage as he barked orders to his crew. "Now!" Zephyr shouted. Harrison lobbed the EMP device into the room. It detonated in a silent flash of blue-white light. Instantly, the ship's systems went dark. Dren's triumphant expression morphed into one of shock and disbelief. As loyal Voth forces boarded the disabled battlecruiser, Zephyr's attention was drawn to a commotion outside. Through the viewport, she saw Donald's fighter spiraling out of control, trailing smoke and debris. Without hesitation, Zephyr sprinted towards the shuttle bay. She commandeered a Voth shuttle, her fingers dancing over the controls with practiced ease. The shuttle shot out of the bay, streaking towards Donald's falling craft. "Hold on, Donald," she muttered, pushing the engines to their limit. As they entered Earth's atmosphere, Zephyr activated the shuttle's advanced heat shielding. She maneuvered alongside Donald's damaged fighter, matching its tumbling descent. "Donald, can you hear me?" she called over the comm. His strained voice crackled through. "Zephyr, what are you doing?" "Saving you," she replied, a hint of a smile in her voice despite the dire situation. "I'm going to create an energy tether. Brace yourself." Zephyr activated the shuttle's emergency systems, generating a pulsing beam of energy that connected the two craft. The sudden link sent shudders through both vehicles, but held firm. Together they plummeted through the atmosphere, fire streaking past the viewports. Zephyr gritted her teeth, using every ounce of her skill to keep them stable. Donald's voice came through intermittently, offering encouragement and tactical advice. The ocean rushed up to meet them. At the last possible moment, Zephyr engaged the shuttle's hover systems, slowing their descent. They hit the water hard, sending up a massive plume of spray, but both craft remained intact. As rescue ships approached their position, Zephyr slumped in her seat, exhausted but elated. She opened a channel to Donald's fighter. "Still with me?" His chuckle came through clearly. "Always." In the aftermath of the crisis, the atmosphere of the peace talks changed dramatically. General Steele, impressed by the cooperation between humans and Voth, became a vocal advocate for increased collaboration. As Donald and Zephyr recovered from their ordeal, they found themselves at the center of a rapidly evolving political landscape. Dr. Rossi's breakthroughs in adapting Voth genetic research for human benefit became a cornerstone of the negotiations. However, Not everyone welcomed these developments. Reports came in of Agent Cole going to ground, his whereabouts unknown. Hardline factions on both sides began to stir, viewing the potential alliance as a threat to their respective species' dominance. Zephyr gazed out at the Earth from the space station's observation deck, her scales shimmering with a mix of hope and uncertainty. Donald stood beside her, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. "What happens now?" she asked softly. Donald's eyes scanned the stars, considering the challenges that lay ahead. "Now," he said, "we build something new, together." As they stood there, united in their shared vision of the future, neither could shake the feeling that their greatest trials were still to come. The path to lasting peace between humans and Voth would be fraught with danger, but for the first time, it seemed truly possible. The path to lasting peace between humans and Voth would be fraught with danger, but for the first time, it seemed truly achievable. In the weeks that followed, the political landscape shifted dramatically. The space station crisis and Zephyr's daring rescue of Donald had captured the imagination of both species, becoming a powerful symbol of what could be accomplished through cooperation. General Steele, once skeptical of the Voth, now championed the cause of alliance with unexpected vigor. "We stand at a crossroads," he announced during a joint press conference with Ambassador Krell. "The events of the past month have shown us that our differences are far outweighed by our shared potential." As they spoke, holographic displays showcased the unprecedented collaboration between human and Voth scientists. Dr. Rossi's breakthroughs in adapting Voth genetic research for human benefit had opened up entirely new avenues of medical advancement. The culmination of these efforts was the announcement of a formal peace treaty between Earth and the Voth Conclave. At its heart was an ambitious initiative, a joint research facility to be built on Earth, dedicated to combining the scientific knowledge of both species. Donald and Zephyr found themselves thrust into the spotlight once more, appointed as co-leaders of the project. As they stood before a mixed audience of humans and Voth, Donald couldn't help but marvel at how far they'd come. "Project Synthesis," Zephyr announced, her scales shimmering with excitement, "will be more than just a research facility. It will be a beacon of hope, a testament to what we can achieve when we work together." The chosen location for the facility held special significance, a remote area of the Pacific Northwest, not far from where Zephyr's ship had originally crashed. As construction began, the site became a hive of activity. Human and Voth workers labored side by side, their combined efforts giving rise to a structure unlike anything seen on Earth before. Donald and Zephyr threw themselves into their work, their days filled with endless meetings, design reviews, and problem-solving sessions. Yet as demanding as the project was, they found themselves drawing closer, their shared experiences forging a bond that transcended species. One evening, as they stood on a viewing platform overlooking the half-finished facility, Zephyr turned to Donald, her eyes reflecting the setting sun. "Do you ever wonder if we're moving too fast?" she asked softly. Donald considered her question, watching as a mixed team of human and Voth engineers calibrated a massive piece of equipment below. "Maybe," he admitted, "but sometimes, when the moment is right, you have to take a leap of faith." Zephyr's scales rippled in what Donald had come to recognize as a smile. She reached out, her clawed hand intertwining with his fingers. The gesture, once alien, now felt as natural as breathing. But not everyone shared their optimism. As news of Project Synthesis spread, so too did the voices of dissent. Colonel Victor Graves, a decorated former military officer, began to gain a following with his fiery speeches denouncing the Voth alliance. "Wake up, people!" Graves shouted at a rally in Houston, his voice booming over the restless crowd. "These aliens aren't here to help us. They're here to conquer us, to steal our planet right out from under our feet." Similar sentiments were echoing across Voth space. Captain Dren, who had managed to escape custody during his transfer, was rallying support among conservative Voth factions. "Humans are children playing with fire," Dren declared in a smuggled holographic message. "By sharing our knowledge with them, we risk our very way of life. The Conclave has lost its way, but we will set it right." As these opposing factions grew in strength, Donald and Zephyr found themselves facing an increasing number of threats. Security briefings became a daily occurrence, each one detailing new potential risks to the project. "We've intercepted communications suggesting a coordinated attack on collaboration sites," Major Harrison reported during one such meeting. His grim expression underscored the seriousness of the situation. In response, Ambassador Krell and General Steele took the unprecedented step of establishing a mixed human-Voth security force. The sight of human and Voth soldiers training together became commonplace at Project Synthesis, a visible reminder of the stakes they faced. Amidst the growing tension, Dr. Rossi made a breakthrough that would change everything. "I've found it," she announced breathlessly, bursting into Donald and Zephyr's office one afternoon. "A way to halt Voth genetic degradation using human DNA." The implications were staggering. This discovery promised to solve the existential crisis that had driven the Voth to seek out Earth in the first place, but it also raised the stakes of their mission to dangerous new heights. "If this gets out before we're ready," Zephyr said, her frills quivering with concern, "it could push the extremists on both sides over the edge." Donald nodded grimly. "Then we need to be ready for anything." Drawing on his Special Forces background, Donald began training an elite group of humans and Voth in advanced combat techniques. Zephyr worked alongside him, integrating Voth technology into their defensive systems. Together, they forged a security force unlike any other on Earth. As the official opening ceremony for Project Synthesis approached, the atmosphere grew increasingly tense. Intelligence reports suggested that both human and Voth extremist groups were planning a coordinated attack to disrupt the event and destroy the facility. Donald stood at the command center, surveying the holographic display of the facility's defenses. Zephyr worked beside him, her claws dancing over the controls as she fine-tuned the security protocols. "Perimeter sensors are at maximum sensitivity," she reported. "If anyone so much as sneezes within a mile of this place, we'll know about it." Donald nodded, his eyes scanning the readings. "Good. We can't afford to take any chances." As they worked, a notification flashed on the screen. Donald tapped it, revealing a message from Dr. Rossi. "She wants to meet us in the lab," he said, frowning. "Says it's urgent." They made their way through the facility's winding corridors, nodding to the mixed patrols of human and Voth security personnel. The lab was a marvel of combined technology, with equipment from both species seamlessly integrated. Dr. Rossi looked up as they entered, her face pale with worry. "I've detected an anomaly in the latest batch of genetic samples," she said without preamble. "I think someone's been tampering with our research." Zephyr's frills flared in alarm. "Tampering? How?" As Dr. Rossi began to explain, alarms suddenly blared throughout the facility. Donald's comm unit crackled to life with urgent reports of multiple security breaches. The attack had begun. The facility erupted into chaos as alarms blared and emergency lights flashed. Donald's comm unit crackled with urgent reports from all sectors. "Multiple breaches detected in sectors 3, 7, and 9, a voice shouted over the din. "Unknown number of hostiles." Donald locked eyes with Zephyr, their silent communication speaking volumes. They had prepared for this, but the reality of the situation still sent a chill down his spine. "Dr. Rossi," Donald said, his voice steady despite the urgency, "lock down the lab and secure all research data. We'll handle the security situation." The scientist nodded, her fingers already flying over the lab's control panel. As the reinforced doors slid shut, Donald and Zephyr sprinted towards the command center. The corridors were a flurry of activity as human and Voth security personnel rushed to their assigned positions. Donald felt a surge of pride at their seamless coordination, a testament to the intensive training they had undergone. In the command center, holographic displays illuminated the unfolding crisis. Red dots indicated breach points, while blue markers showed the positions of their security forces. "Zephyr, take control of the defense systems," Donald ordered. "I'll coordinate our ground teams." She nodded, her claws dancing over the controls with practiced ease. "Shields at maximum. Activating countermeasures." Donald activated the facility-wide comm system. "All units, this is Commander Hawkins. Implement Protocol Omega. I repeat, Protocol Omega is now in effect." As their forces mobilized, Donald's eyes narrowed on a particular cluster of red dots moving with alarming precision. "That's not random," he muttered. "They know our layout." Zephyr hissed in agreement. "Look at their formation. It's a pincer move. Human tactics with Voth technology." "Graves and Dren," Donald growled. "They've joined forces." A new alert flashed on the main screen. Donald's heart sank as he recognized the energy signatures. "Voth scout ship detected in orbit. They're charging weapons." Zephyr's frills flared in alarm. "Our shields won't hold against a sustained orbital bombardment." Donald made a split-second decision. "I'll lead the ground team to repel the infiltrators. Can you handle the orbital threat?" Zephyr nodded, her eyes gleaming with drive. "Go! I'll coordinate with our ships in orbit." As Donald raced towards the outer perimeter, the first impacts from the Voth ship rocked the facility. He stumbled, catching himself against a wall as the lights flickered. Outside, the scene was one of controlled chaos. Human and Voth security forces had established defensive positions, exchanging fire with the advancing insurgents. The air crackled with energy weapons and the sharp report of gunfire. Donald spotted a familiar face among the defenders. "Major Harrison," he called out. "Status report." The grizzled officer ducked behind cover as a volley of Voth energy blasts sizzled overhead. "They've got us pinned down, sir. At least 50 hostiles, using some kind of cloaking tech we can't penetrate." Donald's mind raced, analyzing the situation. He tapped his comm unit. "Zephyr, can you recalibrate our sensors to detect the Voth cloaking signatures?" Her voice came through, strained but focused. "Working on it. Give me 30 seconds." As Donald waited, he noticed a shimmer in the air, barely perceptible, but unmistakable to his trained eye. "There!" he shouted, firing his weapon at the distortion. The shot connected, revealing a Voth insurgent as the cloaking field failed. The creature fell with a screech, its weapon clattering to the ground. "All units," Donald broadcast, "watch for visual distortions in the air. Fire on anything that doesn't look right." His comm unit chirped. "Sensors recalibrated," Zephyr reported. "You should be able to see them now." True to her word, the holographic display on Donald's wrist lit up with new targets. He relayed the information to his teams, and the tide of battle began to turn. But as they pushed back the ground assault, a deafening explosion rocked the facility. Donald looked up to see a massive fireball blooming in the sky, the remains of the Voth scout ship. "Zephyr," he called urgently into his comm, "what happened?" Her voice came through, breathless but triumphant. "Dren's ship is neutralized, but they launched something before we took them out. Some kind of missile. I'm trying to—" Her words were cut off by another explosion, this one closer. The ground shook violently, and Donald was thrown off his feet. As he struggled to rise, his ears ringing, he saw a figure emerge from the smoke. Colonel Graves stood before him, his body grotesquely enhanced with stolen Voth technology. His eyes gleamed with a fanatical light as he raised a weapon that pulsed with alien energy. "It's over, Hawkins," Graves snarled. "You and your alien friends can't stop what's coming." Donald's muscles tensed, ready for action. As he prepared to face this new threat, he could only hope that Zephyr and the others were safe. The battle for Project Synthesis and the future of human-Voth relations had reached its critical point. Moment. Donald's muscles tensed as he faced Graves, his mind racing to formulate a plan. But before either of them could act, a blinding flash of light erupted between them, accompanied by a high-pitched whine. Graves stumbled back, shielding his eyes. Donald, recognizing the signature of Voth technology, dove to the side just as a concentrated energy beam struck the spot where he had been standing. "Donald!" Zephyr's voice rang out as she emerged from the smoke, wielding a modified Voth weapon. "Are you all right?" He nodded, quickly regaining his footing. "Perfect timing." Graves, his augmented body recovering faster than a normal human, snarled and raised his weapon. But he never got the chance to fire. A series of precise shots from the combined human-Voth security team took him down, his enhanced form collapsing in a shower of sparks. As the dust settled, Donald and Zephyr surveyed the aftermath. The attack had been repelled, but at a cost. Parts of the facility lay in ruins, and many of their personnel were wounded. "We need to secure the perimeter," Donald began, but Zephyr placed a clawed hand on his arm. "There's something else," she said, her voice tight with urgency. "During the attack, I intercepted a transmission from one of the Voth ships. They mentioned a genetic repository on the Voth homeworld. I think it might be the key to completing Dr. Rossi's research." Donald's eyes widened as he grasped the implications. "If we could get our hands on pure Voth genetic samples, we could solve the degradation problem once and for all," Zephyr finished. In the days that followed, as they worked to rebuild and strengthen Project Synthesis, Donald and Zephyr presented their findings to the newly formed Human-Voth Alliance. After much debate, the expedition was authorized. Weeks later, Donald stood in the launch bay of the HSV Horizon, a state-of-the-art vessel that represented the pinnacle of human and Voth engineering. He watched as Dr. Rossi directed the loading of her equipment, her excitement palpable even from a distance. "Having second thoughts?" Zephyr asked, appearing silently at his side. Donald shook his head, a small smile playing on his lips. "Not a chance. You?" "Never," she replied, her scales rippling in that familiar way that always made his heart skip a beat. As the horizon broke free of Earth's atmosphere, Donald felt a mixture of anticipation and trepidation. The journey to the Voth homeworld would take several weeks, even with their advanced propulsion systems. During the voyage, Donald and Zephyr spent countless hours in the ship's training simulator, honing their skills and developing new tactics that blended their unique abilities. Their movements became so synchronized that the rest of the crew often stopped to watch them, marveling at the fluid dance of human and Voth. One evening, as they sat in the ship's observation deck watching the stars streak by, Zephyr turned to Donald, her eyes reflecting the cosmic light. "I never imagined I'd be here," she said softly. "When I first came to Earth, humans were just primitives to be studied. But now—" Donald reached out, intertwining his fingers with her clawed hand. Now I can't imagine my life without you," she finished, leaning her head against his shoulder. Their moment of peace was shattered by the blaring of alarms. "All hands to battle stations," the ship's AI announced. "Multiple Voth vessels detected on intercept course." Donald and Zephyr sprinted to the bridge, arriving just as the first energy blast rocked the ship. "Isolationist faction," Zephyr growled, her claws flying over the tactical console. "They're trying to prevent us from reaching the homeworld." Donald strapped himself into the weapons control station. "Then let's show them why that's a bad idea." What followed was a harrowing space battle that pushed both human and Voth technology to its limits. Donald's tactical genius combined with Zephyr's intimate knowledge of Voth ship systems allowed them to dance through the enemy formation, disabling ships with surgical precision. As the last enemy vessel retreated, the bridge crew erupted in cheers, but Donald and Zephyr exchanged a knowing look. This was only the beginning. The Horizon entered the Voth atmosphere under heavy fire, Zephyr's expert piloting weaving them through a maze of defense platforms and energy barriers. They landed in a remote area, the ship's advanced cloaking technology concealing them from immediate detection. As they stepped onto Voth soil, Donald was struck by the alien beauty of the landscape. Towering crystal formations jutted from the ground, refracting the light of twin suns into dazzling rainbows. The genetic repository is located in an ancient city about 50 kilometers from here, Zephyr informed the team, consulting a holographic map. "We'll need to move quickly and quietly." Their journey through the Voth wilderness was fraught with danger. Strange creatures stalked them from the shadows, and more than once they had to take cover as Voth patrols passed overhead. Finally, they reached the outskirts of the ancient city. Its architecture was a marvel of organic curves and crystalline structures, seeming to grow out of the very bedrock. The entrance to the underground facility should be there. Zephyr pointed to a nondescript building near the city center. As they approached, a group of armed Voth suddenly materialized from behind cloaking fields. At their head stood a female Voth whose features bore a striking resemblance to Captain Dren. "I am Sira, daughter of Dren," she announced, her voice cold with hatred. "You will go no further, human filth and traitors." Donald raised his hands slowly, mind racing. "We're not here to fight," he began, but Sira cut him off with a snarl. You brought the fight to us when you corrupted our people with your inferior genes, she spat. Zephyr stepped forward, her posture rigid with almost unchecked anger. You're wrong, Sierra. We're here to save our people, not destroy them. Sierra's response was to open fire, her followers joining in. Donald and Zephyr moved as one, diving for cover while returning fire. The rest of their team scattered, Dr. Rossi and the other scientists taking shelter behind a nearby structure. The battle that ensued was like nothing Donald had ever experienced. Voth technology clashed with human ingenuity in a dazzling display of light and sound. He and Zephyr fought back to back, their movements perfectly synchronized, each anticipating the other's needs without a word. As they pushed forward, Sierra's forces fell back into the underground facility. Donald and Zephyr pursued, leaving the rest of their team to secure the entrance. The ancient Voth structure was a maze of twisting corridors and vast chambers filled with technology beyond human understanding. As they descended deeper, the air grew thick with tension. Suddenly, the facility shuddered violently. Alarms began to blare, and a computerized voice announced something in the Voth language. Zephyr's eyes widened in horror. The containment systems are failing. If we don't stop it, the resulting explosion will destroy half the continent. Donald's mind raced, assessing their options. Can we shut it down manually? Zephyr nodded grimly. Yes, but we'll have to reach the core. It's at the heart of the facility, through the heaviest concentration of radiation and failing systems. Their eyes met, a silent understanding passing between them. Without a word, they turned and sprinted deeper into the facility, towards the growing danger that threatened to engulf them all. As they ran, Donald activated his comm unit. Dr. Rossi, we've secured the genetic samples. Begin evacuation procedures for the city immediately. We'll handle the core. Ahead, they could see the pulsing light of the facility's core, its erratic rhythm a visual representation of the impending catastrophe. Donald and Zephyr paused at the entrance to the chamber, the air around them crackling with uncontrolled energy. Ready? Donald asked, his hand hovering over the door controls. Zephyr's scales rippled, a mix of perseverance and something deeper shining in her eyes. Always. Together they stepped into the maelstrom, prepared to face whatever challenges awaited them in their quest to save not just two worlds, but the future of human-Voth relations itself.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.